in the Senate in your case. And the explanation can be extended over 2 days if you desire, or you can complete it in an hour or so on the floor today or any time that it comes up. After all of the amendments have been explained to your colleagues, no third reading vote is taken on the bill. Rather, the bill shall be sent back, and the bill shall not be sent back to the House either, but rather the Joint Conference Committee shall be appointed by the presiding officers of both chambers. One more difference in this process with the normal process is the Conference Committee is comprised of 5 members as opposed to the traditional 3 members. So I just thought I'd give a brief overview of what to expect when this is prepared on the floor. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll give a brief outline of this one-pager. I call it the high-level overview. And we have identified 11 amendments that are mirror between the House and the Senate. The House adopted 42 amendments. The Senate adopted 41 amendments, pretty close. 11 of those were, in our opinion, mirror, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Secondly, if you will look on the bottom of page 2 of the general fund, I just want to point out to you the difference between the House and the Senate in terms of entire spending. And I acknowledge that House bills show up in the Senate column, which you have not had an opportunity to consider. For example, local government direct distribution, the House side added $13 million. So that's shown on both columns. But what is fairly remarkable is with all of the machinations of the both sides, there is a whopping $1.54 million difference between the two houses. Now, we'll get into the details of those differences, and they are significant, but at the end of the day, the bottom line on the general fund is remarkably close.
So Don, that's line 69, columns R and T?
Mr. Chairman, that is line 67.
67, yeah.
Secondly, both chambers, and I'm referring again to the bottom of this one-pager here, the very bottom number, it says total. Both chambers have saved in excess of $1 billion. I'm trying to identify a number of the similarities. The similarities include total spending, total savings, total number of amendments. Now, I acknowledge the details of those, and now I'll go into the differences. In particular, with respect to savings, the Senate side saved $1 billion in permanent savings, combination of the PMTF and the Common School Permanent Land Fund. Alternatively, on the House side, they only put in $300 million in permanent savings. They put in excess of $700 million in other types of savings, such as Wyoming's Tomorrow, Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund, Cultural Trust Fund, and importantly, the 2 reserve accounts, PMTF and Common School reserve accounts. But the total of in excess of $1 billion is roughly the same. It's where you place the money is different. If I could move back up to the appropriations, and this is section 2, so it's the middle of the page on my one-page overview. The big difference on the Senate side and why you're quite close on the spending is after 3 efforts on the $160 million for the governor's contingency, you left that in the bill available to the governor for expenditure. The House took that out. So that's a big difference on the spending side.
Okay, Don, I'm looking for that. Tell me where. Governor's matching contingency, okay.
I also wanted to touch base on maybe the next 7 or 8 lines that are different. And these are the big differences. We'll get into very small differences, but the $160 million is a big difference. The next big difference is $28.4 million, which the Senate appropriated for property tax hold harmless for the entities receiving property taxes, counties, special districts, municipalities. The House, as you know, has not had an opportunity to review that tax reduction bill, so it's not surprising that they have no appropriation to hold the political subdivisions harmless. Now, moving over to the House side, you can see the next line of a large difference. They appropriated $10 million of general funds for affordable housing. That amendment was not ever considered by the Senate side, and that's a significant difference between the two sides. The second large difference on the House side is a $10 million appropriations for a PA, that's a physician assistance training program at the University of Wyoming. A second $10 million appropriation. I don't believe there was any such amendment that was ever discussed on the Senate side. The next largest amendment is WyoLink, and it is actually a mirror amendment, $8.6 million of general fund supporting WyoLink, and it appears in both the House column and the Senate column. One moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the pause. You also, both sides had a reduction. The Senate side reduced $7.5 million in general funds, $7.5 million in federal funds for an appropriation to the Department of Health for the developmental disabilities waiting list. You cut that out of the budget. The House side had a similar reduction, although it is refers to another bill, Senate File 96. They reduced $7 million from the general fund for the state engineer board of control in the water bill. So they reference that water bill and reduce that bill by $7 million general fund. So both sides have a reduction to the budget of approximately $7 million. Next, on the House side, you have an appropriation for $3.5 million under the enterprise inflation just for community colleges. That's the CC. I don't believe that amendment was ever considered on the Senate side. The next one down is Wyoming's Tomorrow. The Senate did not address the appropriation to the expenditure account, and the House appropriated $2.5 million to allow for scholarships to begin next school year, August, if you will. And then all other actions on the budget bill, you can see the Senate cut $3 million and the House increased $1 million. But we will go through each amendment, but that's the big dollars. Where you save the money, how to dispose of the $160 million contingency, and then those big line items, housing, PA school, a property tax relief, and the two reductions of $7 million. If there are no further questions, I'll proceed to this summary sheet, and this is the large tabloid side,
Don,
and I'll walk through each amendment.
Before you do so, sticking to the same sheet, Roman numeral 3, appropriations and transfers to savings. I had a question. 1, 2, 3, 4, the fifth line down, Wyoming Tomorrow Endowment Fund, you have $60 million under both House and Senate. And then below that in italics, note WYO Tomorrow just in budget bill, 40 million House, 0 Senate. Can you explain those two?
Absolutely. So our practice is to profile all individual bills on both houses once they've passed committee of the whole in the House of Origin. So there is a bill that adds $60 million of LSRA funding into the Wyoming's Tomorrow account. So that's a standalone bill. It is still alive, and it's showing up on both the House side and the Senate side. In the Senate's case, you removed the $40 million general fund appropriation to the Wyoming's Tomorrow endowment. That was one of your amendments to the budget. The House side did not remove that. However, there is contingency language in that provision that says, if there is another bill, this appropriation falls off. So it turns out whether you took that provision out of the budget bill or not, as long as that other bill, the $60 million bill, is alive, then there's no impact to the profile in the budget bill.
Okay.
And that other bill, for your knowledge, is House Bill 30.
Yeah.
Senator Grew.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Don, so on House Bill 30, we've taken action on that?
Mr. Chairman, you have not. It has
Okay.
passed out of the House, I believe. It has not
Okay.
been
Oh, I
considered
thought,
by the Senate.
I must have not heard that. I thought you said it had passed out of.
Well, I thought you said it ends up in that column if it's passed the cow, and I don't know that HB 30 is passed committee of the whole in the Senate.
Mr. Chairman, it is passed committee of the whole in the House of origin.
Okay, thank you.
So
Oh, it enters on both columns.
it enters in both columns.
All
So
right. Thought I missed $60 million somewhere.
for example, your property tax reduction bill appears on the House side because it had passed committee of the whole in the Senate, but not the House.
Thanks, Don.
With that overview, I will proceed through.
And one more thing. The next lines are the PWTMF RA and the Common School Public Land Fund RA. And we know what those differences are, permanent versus the reserves. And the 5X bill is HB 89. And we saw some amendments where the House took everything out of their reserve accounts and then subsequently placed it back. Was that as a consequence of House Bill 89?
No, Mr. Chairman, and that's an excellent point. The profile that you have before you, this was produced yesterday morning. I would hold on to this one. Just put it in the bottom of your pile and maybe don't throw this one away. The reason being is a lot happened on committee of the whole yesterday in both houses, including House Bill 89. And House Bill 89 passed. So the next time we put out a goldenrod, it will be even less decipherable than the normal version because there will be so many conflicts that it will be very hard to say what is going on. And the reason being is there are now going to be appropriations in the budget bill and in House Bill 89, and unfortunately, they don't have the perfect contingency language, probably by design. It was never asked for, but it's going to quickly fall out of alignment.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
can I ask a question?
please.
Dawn, so when we're back down here under subsection 3, appropriations and transfers, with the actions that the House took on the reserve accounts, could you tell us of those 4 accounts, where they profiled that money, whether it was LSRA, general fund, or school foundation program money?
Yes. Yeah, I think Senator Hicks is requesting the source of the funding that the House used to fill the reserve accounts. And let me start with the PMTF, $150 million. That is general funds. That is general fund appropriation to the corpus of the 150 to the PMTF. Next, the Common School Permanent Land Fund. That is a combination of investment income off of the PMTF and state royalties, which by constitution are split 2/3 to the permanent fund, 1/3 to a holding account. And so they put in the 1/3 into the corpus. Then moving up to your question, Senator Hicks, the Permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund Reserve Account of $274.7 million. That is an appropriation from the LSRA.
And then, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up,
Mhm.
what about with the Hathaway Reserve Account and the Excellence in Higher Education? Are those LSRA?
Mr. Chairman, the Hathaway and the higher ed are both LSRA as well. The one I have not spoken to is the $350 million to the Common School Permanent Land Fund. And that one is arguably the most complicated amendment in the budget bill. But it is kind of intriguing the way the House elected to do this. They identified all non-dedicated K-12 revenue, swapped out all of last year's appropriations to the school capital construction fund, freed up those resources, and then put it into the reserve account. And if I might, Mr. Chairman, if you could share your goldenrod with the majority floor leader. It's really kind of an important point between the differences. If you could flip to page 4 of your goldenrod, you will see on line 59, the House position leaves just $228 million in the SFP. The Senate position leaves $555 million in the SFP. And you'll drop down to lines 72 through 77 on page 4, 72 through 77, the middle column. You can see that the House basically zeroed out almost all of those appropriations to the School Capital Construction Fund. So their concept here was, hey, we want to put savings in for schools. We want to use school money for doing that. We do not want to use constitutionally restricted money. So they kind of clean up, if you will, page 4, grab money out of the SFP that is eligible for purposes other than spending on K-12 and use that to shift to the reserve account. In contrast, the Senate really just wrote a check out of the LSRA, right? You wrote $750 million or thereabouts from the LSRA to the corpus. So when you look at the fiscal profile, on page 4, the House has a much lower balance on the school foundation program than the Senate does. And then when you flip back to page 3, the Senate has a much lower balance on the LSRA than the House does. You have 1.25 billion in the LSRA, and they have 1.73 billion in the LSRA. So my point being is they used SFP money for savings, and the Senate side used LSRA money for savings.
So Don, go back. Monies that, for instance, come out of the Common School Public Land Fund are restricted to use only for K-12. Those monies had ended up in school CapCon?
No, all sorts of other monies had. So let's just run through, if I might.
Okay.
And I'm on page 4 in the middle column of numbers. Let's start with line 73. That is really, it says transfer from school major maintenance sub-account. That's investment earnings off of the PMTF. It goes to the SIPA, and then it goes to this sub-account, and then it goes to the capital construction account. I mean, it's the bouncing ball, if you will. It has 4 bounces, but it ultimately ends here. But the original source of that money is investment income off of the PMTF. It is not restricted for K-12 whatsoever. It was being used in K-12 as a result of last year's budget. So they unwound all of that and said, hold on, we're taking clean money and putting that in reserves, and we will use restricted money for building schools and providing operations salaries.
Again, what is the rationale? Why unrestricted money into reserves and restricted money into CapCon? What's the compelling thesis for that?
I think the compelling thesis is if you don't do that, you end up with over $500 million in the SFP sitting there with arguably poor returns, liquid cash. You're not putting it in any kind of a savings vehicle. And after this biennium, you really can't go back and change the color of that money. You have a one-time chance of taking unrestricted dollars and spending them on something other than K-12.
Mr. Chairman, I can
Please.
ask a follow-up question. So Don, associated with these transfers to the reserve account, particularly when we start looking at the school major maintenance sub-account, are these going to be now permanent transfers, or are these one time and then that transfer goes away within it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it is one time. It is only this appropriation, and it is only for the period of the budget. So I think the policy choice here is, do you want to leave cash in the SFP or the LSRA? Now, to get here, that amendment took a long time, probably 4 hours, because you had to go in and unwind everything you did last year and then put the model back together again. That
Took
looks
4 hours to write it or 4 hours to explain it?
So, Mr. Chairman, again, if I
Please.
may, part of that unwinding this is where we split, I believe, that 1/3 or into the corpus of the OPSTA money. Is that included in that or not?
Mr. Chairman, that is included, and you will the 1% severance tax is not included. So that is still going to the corpus. What is involved in this is the over the second cap that goes to the school foundation program reserve account, and that appears on line 109. And also, worth mentioning, I'm not advocating for either position here, but line 109 on the House side, that 150 million on the House side is what I call pristine, meaning it's 100% severance taxes. And if you want to spend that on higher ed or roads or wildlife, that even though it's in an education account, there is no statutory or constitutional protections on that money. It's just a pot of money.
Follow up, Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be helpful to be able to explain this and even further understand it, Don, if you could put the diagram together with this is what we had where we started. And then this is what we have as a result of these actions associated with these transfers, and then clarify that they're one time. After the budget, we go back to the same procedures as this, but just the picture's worth 1,000 words, and just always beneficial for me to be able to, because we're bouncing around from this line and the LSRA and down to the school and then the sub account within major maintenance, that it just becomes much more clear if we can get that visual and a graphics, Mr. Chairman.
Don?
Mr. Chairman, I will do that.
Okay. So I just still have one conceptual loop to close. I want to circle back to something. So you said putting unrestricted funds into the Common School Public Land Fund reserve account means they can be invested as you wish for a higher rate of return. The implication being if they were restricted funds in that reserve account, you would be limited in how you could invest it?
Mr. Chairman, no. If they were restricted, then they would reside in the school CapCon and school foundation program. And that's why the Senate side has $500 million there. And the school foundation program cannot be invested in equities, for example.
Oh, okay.
So it's the restrictions on the money, not the location.
Moving them out of there into a fund that's got more flexibility.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Don, sorry. Back on track.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now shifting to the tabloid side, 11 by 17. We have 3 sections of amendments here. These are all House amendments. The first section appears on the first 11 rows, and these are designated, in our opinion, identical. And then we have a middle section, which is related. And I will admit, we took a fair bit of subjectivity as to what is related or what not. But if there's 2 concepts in both houses, and you'll see that's really not related, Don. But I'll explain why we think it's the same policy choice. It's either A or B. And then at the bottom, on page 2, bottom of page 2 and all of page 3 are non-identical, unrelated amendments, meaning they were never considered, or if they were considered in the Senate side, they were failed. So starting on page 1, and I'll move through these mirror amendments pretty quickly because you saw the same thing in your side. The Larson amendment on the House side, Senator Anderson, you had the same amendment on the Senate side. You moved back the Education Commission on the states from the Department of Education to the governor's office, identical on both sides.
So Larson amendment was
H 2001, and the Anderson amendment was Senate 2001.
Gotcha.
I'm on the
Right.
first line.
Thank you.
The second line is Representative Dan Zwanitzer, House Second Reading Amendment number 4, and it was mirrored up with Senate Second Reading Amendment number 3 from Senator Case, which provided that the Capitol be open just 4 hours per day on weekends. Previously, it was the entire business day. So both sides reduced that to a half day on Saturday and Sundays. The third mirror amendment is House Second Reading Amendment number 5. Representative Walters offered that. It is identical to Senator Anderson's Second Reading Amendment number 2 on the Senate side. And this specified that the funding for $412,000 was limited to the Thyra Thompson building operations and staff. They wanted to make it clear that wasn't for Cheyenne facilities or anything but the agency's request for Thyra Thompson. No new money, just a footnote. The fourth mirror amendment is House Second Reading Amendment number 6, Representative Larson offering it on the House side. It mirrored up with Senator Anderson's Second Reading Amendment number 4. And this moved the Deputy Director Ombudsman, an engineer, and a geologist position to be ongoing and remove the one-time footnote. So those FTE would be ongoing. House Second Reading Amendment number 10 and Senate Third Reading Amendment number 4. This was the Representative Burkhardt amendment on the House side, mirrored up with the Senator Pappas amendment. This added $8.6 million general funds to WildLink to be used with local government needs related to WildLink. And let me pause here, and this is one of the first distinctions. If you wish to remove this from the mirror amendment, you can. In our opinion, it is mirror. There is one word different. It is the Senate side says within, the House side says in, meaning it is within next year's standard budget or in next year's standard budget. We've concluded it has the identical meaning with either word. We've looked in other statute, and those two words in this context, in that same sentence, are used interchangeably. If you want to call those non-identical, you can, but we have always referred to that as a mirror. The next amendment, House Third Reading Amendment number 25, Representative Dan Zwanitzer offered, and Senator Baldwin offered a mirror amendment, Senate Third Reading Amendment number 21. This was a $20,000 appropriation for a study of a program of all-inclusive care for the elderly, or the PACE program. $20,000 appropriation. This one also has a slight difference. If you look at the text of the amendment, the location of the footnote, it says renumber as necessary, but the location of the footnote is behind footnote 15 versus behind footnote 10. It is immaterial because of that renumbering, and it had to do with the fact that the Senate side removed the Medicaid money of $7.5 million. So it has the identical effect, and the substantive language is the same. The next item is House Second Reading Amendment number 13, the Larson Amendment on the House side, mirrors up with the Senate Third Reading Amendment number 8. Senator Anderson also offered this. This was a clarification on the $1.05 million to the Department of Family Services. Specifically, the original language said the entire $1.05 million was for the tribes, particularly related to high behavioral health needs. And according to Representative Larson, that was not his intent. His intent was that $500,000 be designated for the tribes, and $550,000 could be used for any high needs within the state. So that clarified it and is identical. The next item is House Second Reading Amendment number 15, Representative Larson, and Senate Second Reading Amendment number 8, Senator Nethercott. This appropriates the $6.2 million of MRG money that was redeposited in that account. I suspect that was the intent all along, but the governor did not include that in his recommendation, and neither did JAC, so this is largely a cleanup. House Second Reading Amendment number 17, the Burkhardt Amendment, and Senate Second Reading Amendment Number 34, Senator Dockstader, provides $300,000 for economic and technological studies of graphite, high-grade graphite by the School of Energy Resources. The 10th mirror amendment is House Second Reading Amendment Number 22, Representative Summers offering it on the House side, mirrored up with President Driscoll's amendment, Senate Second Reading Amendment Number 11. This restored the ECA to the governor's recommendation, and consistent with the governor's recommendation and the JEC recommendation makes that ECA ongoing. And finally, the last mirror amendment is House Second Reading Amendment Number 30, sponsored by Representative Dave Zwanitzer and mirrored up with Senator Cooper's Second Reading Amendment Number 19, added $958,085 in the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund Challenge account. A very specific number, but I think that was identified. If this passes, if the matching occurs, you will end up with exactly $200 million in the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust, which for some members and a former governor was the goal of that account. Last point I would say on this amendment, if you read them carefully, you will see an introductory change on the House side, I believe, and not the Senate side. Again, it is immaterial. It has no impact on the amendment. That concludes the mirror amendments, and now we're moving into the related amendments. The first one, House Third Reading Amendment Number 46, sponsored by Chairman Nicholas on the House side, mirrors up with Chairman Kinski's Second Reading Amendment Number, or Third Reading Amendment Number 24. This is the technical corrections. You can't quite pick just the House or the Senate side. It'll depend on what other amendments you pick, because there were a couple of technical corrections to House amendments in their tech corrections amendment and Senate amendments in theirs. So we'll pick the lines that apply to the appropriate amendments that the JCC adopts. No substance here. Correct. The next one, which is the second one under the related column, and this is where we, admittedly, staff took a little bit of liberty. Majority Floor Leader Hicks is sitting here with Senate Third Reading Amendment Number 1. It relates to the same topic as Senate or House Second Reading Amendment Number 2, Representative Yin. On the Senate side, you modified the $5,000 for the survey of state employees within Cheyenne, to specify it as within Cheyenne. Representative Yin took that same $5,000 and did a survey of state employees for the provision of childcare. So it's completely different footnotes. I acknowledge that, but it's the same $5,000. So that's why we put them in there as related. There's a policy choice whether what the substance of that survey is. House Second Reading Amendment Number 23 is combined with House Third Reading Amendment Number 10, and it is very similar to Senator Driscoll's, President Driscoll's Second Reading Amendment Number 13 on the Senate side. So both houses appropriated $280,000 and 1 FTE for charter school reviews by the Department of Education. The difference is the House came in and made that appropriation contingent upon Senate File 174. So if Senate File 174 does not pass, the $280,000 would go away. The Senate didn't have that contingency in theirs. That's the only difference. And finally, the last one on that page is House Third Reading Amendment Number 34, Representative Nicholas, and Senator Kinski, Second Reading Amendment Number 41. Again, these are diametrically opposed amendments. I totally agree with that, but they're on the same topic. On the House side, they appropriated $2.5 million into the Wyoming's Tomorrow expenditure account so that scholarships could begin next school year. And on the Senate side, you removed $40 million from the Wyoming's Tomorrow endowment account. So same subject, completely different outcome.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you. Quick question. So the scholarships would begin next year, but I thought they had to reach a certain number before those scholarships were allowed to proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, you're exactly correct. And under the House position, that number is achieved. And not only is that achieved, but they front load the first year's investment income with general funds. So they achieve the $50 million threshold, which is provided for in statute, and they use general funds because there won't be any investment income in the first year, right? Because there's really nothing in the account yet anyway.
Please.
So they're topping the 50 million with a 2.5 to start?
Mr. Chairman, a little bit different. They're putting the 2.5 in the expenditure account, not the corpus, which can be then used for scholarships.
So total appropriations 42.5.
Mr. Chairman, I would argue it's actually quite a bit more than that because you have to look at House Bill 30, which has $65 million total, I believe, in Wyoming's Tomorrow. And keep in mind, you have $10 million from last year as well.
Sorry, Don, but didn't you say that the House had a trigger to say that it would lower if that bill passed?
Mr. Chairman, that is true. So in the budget bill, they have 40 million.
Okay.
That goes away if number. Sorry, I forget the number of the bill here. If House Bill 30 passes.
Right.
So they're kind of running two parallel paths. If House Bill 30 goes away, they ride the budget bill path. If the budget bill succeeds, they don't need House Bill 30. Got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now I'm at the top of page 2. We're still in the related amendments. And the next 3 or 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 really, all relate to savings and where that savings is. And we put them in separate boxes. We tried to kind of break them out into topic areas. But at the end of the day, this is all about savings and where the savings is going. So House Second Reading Amendment number 24, Representative Obermiller's amendment, very similar to the combination of 3 Steinmetz amendments and Senator Kinski's third reading amendment number 23. What Representative Obermiller did was unwind or deappropriate the transfers into the 2 reserve accounts. Now, you'll see subsequent amendments on the House side that basically restore that. So that first line, while they don't delete it, they restore that. So they end up in a very, very different place. House third reading amendment.
So let me ask you, he deappropriated transfers to the reserves. Where did he direct it then to the permanent?
No, Mr. Chairman, he kept it in the general fund. And frankly, these next 2 amendments spend it. Yeah, they restore that again. House third reading amendment number 36 and to Majority Floor Leader Hicks's request, we will put this in a diagram. But this actually walks through in numerical order, and we'll get the diagram where each of those transfers were unwound with. So you can see $88 million intended for the school capital construction account was deposited in the Common School Permanent Land Fund. And you can see that decreases the SCCA. The next line increases the corpus of the common school. Then we move to the 96.1 million for the school major maintenance subaccount. This is investment income off of the PMTF, and you will see they started to unwind that, putting $34 million into the school foundation program reserve account.
So Don,
62.
this is the series of zeros that we saw on page 4.
Yes.
Okay.
I will dispense with reading each of those, but let's drop down to the last line in this box on the far right side in bold. What's the net effect? What's the takeaway? $150 million to the corpus of the Common School Permanent Land Fund, $350 million to the Common school permanent land fund reserve account. That's kind of the net effect of all of that transfers and machinations there. House third reading amendment number 43. This restored the $274.7 million deposit from the LSRA to the PMTF reserve account. So we talked about that up top in the Obermiller amendment and said that he stopped that. Well, Representative Nicholas on third reading came back in and restored half of that. He didn't need to restore the other half because the other half is restored in that big amendment in the middle of the page. He used the all those different school transfers to achieve the school side. So he didn't need to restore the 246.5 million because he already had. House third reading amendment number 15. This is the Representative Washut amendment. And this is a pretty clean amendment compared to the last two. He appropriates $150 million straight general fund to the corpus of the PMTF. That's about as straight as you can do. Where does he get that 150 from? He gets it by eliminating the $160 million governor's contingency. So he strikes out section 327, uses that money, 150 of the 160 for a deposit into the PMTF. Then he takes $5 million and supports the Wyoming State Shooting Complex with general funds. I believe that is similar to Senate File 169, although different funding sources. And then finally, if you'll see the net effect of the Representative Washut amendment is he actually saves $5 million. Because we started out with 160, 5 million went to the shooting complex, 150 went to the corpus, and he saved an additional 5 million for the general fund in that machination. And then finally, the last related amendment, quite similar between Senator Guru on the Senate side, second reading amendment number 15, and Speaker Summers on the House side, House second reading amendment number 25. Both houses ended up with $100 million for school capital construction. The difference is on the House side, there is $5 million set aside for the state construction department to proceed with studies for the most cost-effective approach for school districts. And importantly, the remaining $95 million on the House side is not available for expenditure until there's subsequent legislative action. On the Senate side, the $100 million is available upon enactment of the bill. Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes all the related. So now these are unrelated. Likely you may not have seen several of these. The first third reading amendment, number 1, Representative Walters adds $40,000 in special revenue to increase the compensation of the Chief Technology Officer in the State Treasurer's Office. So no new position, it's enhanced compensation for the head IT person over there. House second reading amendment number 32, Representative Harshman. He adds back 108,001 FTE. This was a agency request in the Department of Revenue for the administration of the property tax relief program. House second reading amendment number 33. This was Representative Henderson's amendment. This added additional language on the $5 million appropriation which JAC had for property tax relief, the existing property tax relief program, and indicated that the appropriation will be reduced dollar for any appropriation in any legislation enacted in 2023 general session that provides residential property tax relief reductions. The net effect of all that yesterday was that $5 million would be reduced by $200,000 due to House Bill 121, the property tax deferral program amendments. I haven't checked with all of our staff, but I believe there was another bill yesterday on the House side that also provided additional property tax relief to the tune of $40 million. And therefore, this $5 million would go completely away. Now, because of the way this is written, the Senate's position on tax reduction does not reduce the $5 million. Reason being is your bill, Senator Beitman's bill for property tax reduction did not include any appropriation. So there is not an appropriation in a bill with property tax relief. So this, you would get to continue with the 5 million and the Senator Beitman's bill number, which is, I think it's 196, maybe. 136, apologies, 136. So that one, just to kind of put a highlight on that, House Second Reading Amendment number 33, Representative Henderson, watch that one because it will end up with some unexpected outcomes. House Second Reading Amendment number 7.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I thought we passed a $28 million appropriation for that SF 136.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, it was appropriated in the budget bill. So that legislation, the budget bill does not have property tax relief, but it does have an appropriation. So it doesn't meet both conditions of the Henderson requirement. So that's why I say the Henderson requirement, you kind of have to be careful when you think through it. The budget bill included appropriation for tax relief, but it didn't include the tax relief. And then Senate File 136 included the tax relief, but it didn't include the appropriation. So it gets a little bit
Mr.
complicated.
Chairman?
Didn't see that one coming.
Just-
Yeah, Senator Guru.
Yeah, just to make sure I got it. So when we were debating that bill, good Senator Anderson had an amendment that would have been in the bill. Had that been there, it would have come off that. It could have come off that total. But since it was separate in a budget amendment, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, now we're on House Second Reading Amendment number 7. Representative J.T. Larson increased the appropriation to the Cultural Trust Fund by $6 million. The net effect of this, you will see a theme here, will bring the Cultural Trust Fund up to $30 million, which purported to the sponsors was the long-term goal of that trust fund, not unlike the $200 million long-term goal on the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust Fund. House Third Reading Amendment number 44, Representative Nicholas, removed the FTE from, if I might, Senator Hicks's amendment in December JAC, which provided $650,000 for the state engineer for studies in the Colorado River Basin. The 650 is left, the ability to contract is left, but that FTE was removed. House Third Reading Amendment number 4, Representative Stith. This is where you get the reduction to Senate File 96. It is a very lengthy amendment, but the net effect is that House Bill 1, the budget bill, is given preference over Senate File 96. Senate File 96 is a water development bill. The issue with the water development bill is it also amends the same section of the budget. So you now have two bills modifying the same section of last year's budget. And if both passes, it will entirely depend on the time that the governor signs, right? If Senate File 96 passes last, the general rule is last action wins. And those two tables do not align. If the governor signs House Bill 1 last, then it would arguably trump Senate File 96. So Senator Stith, or Representative Stith's, excuse me, amendment tries to make a reconciliation as to, okay, if I'm the agency, how do I interpret two bills that amend the same section of law?
Don, ultimately, this is about where we're going to fund the state engineer's office, correct? Out
That
of
is.
water account or general fund?
Yes. Now I'm at the top of page 3, House Second Reading Amendment number 12. This was deleted by the House side, so I don't think much attention needs to be given to that. Originally, Representative Dan Zwanitzer appropriated $3 million for the PACE program, and he relented and changed his mind and said $20,000 for a study, and that ended up being a mere amendment. So House Second Reading Amendment number 12 goes away. House Third Reading Amendment number 27, Representative Lloyd Larson, changes I would say almost a technical correction in a footnote related to additional funding for the comprehensive waiver he added the words "and supports waiver." No new money, clarification on the language. House third reading amendment number 5 adds $100,000 to the Department of Health. This is also a Representative Lloyd Larson amendment, and it directs the Department of Health to modify its methodology and proceed with rebasing for the DD waiver individual budget amounts, also known as the IBA amounts. House second reading amendment number 43 is.
Don, does that include the grandfathered clients? Did they have a series of grandfathered clients as they amended the program?
Yes, I think this arguably could, because it directs the agency to revise their methodology and develop new rebasing.
Okay. Thank you.
House second reading amendment number 43, Representative Dan Zwanitzer, appropriates $500,000 general funds, $500,000 federal funds to the Department of Family Services for prevention and diversion programs.
Didn't we do this last budget for the local juvenile justice programs, or is this something different?
Mr. Chairman, I believe this is related. It is new money, but related to prior efforts. House third reading amendment number 6, Representative Walters, changes the funding for the positions requested by the Office of State Lands. So OSLI requested 5 positions. JAC funded 4 of them. And Representative Walters, after visiting with the agency, we understand, identified that they had a higher priority on one of those 4 positions than the others. So he swapped out which 4 were being approved. He doesn't add the 5th position, but he said, okay, you can have, or the legislature will appropriate the higher priority position, which also comes with a higher salary.
Senator Guru.
Was that the, sorry, Don, was that the PIO position?
It was
says planning.
Yeah, it was policy and planning analyst rather than a land management specialist.
Okay, thank you.
So that is an increase of $83,000. Is that
Yes.
biennial?
That's a little bit odd. It works out to be a 15-month difference.
Okay.
Right. House second reading amendment number 16, Representative Burkhart, appropriates $175,000 for an economist within the School of Energy Resources to address public policy questions. House second reading amendment number 18, sponsored by Representative Brown. No new money to the University of Wyoming, but a footnote direction for them, the university, to study, provide the feasibility of providing in-person classes in Rock Springs and Cheyenne. House third reading amendment number 28, we talked about this as one of the large differences between the House in terms of appropriations. Representative Harshman amendment prevailed with $10 million general fund directed to the university to develop and proceed with an accredited PA or physician assistant program.
So was it in this budget or in the last one that there was money, at least discussion about money to study that?
Excellent memory. That was last year's ARPA bill. The legislature appropriated $500,000. The university did not spend that, nor did they complete a study.
Would they?
So it's listed on your list. I know that you have not seen the ARPA bill, but you have the one-pager that you intend to share with the floor on the, we've colored the ARPA appropriations as to which could be reverted. Mm-hmm. And that one is a appropriation which the agency believes can be reverted because they, A, have not spent it, and they have reported to us that they will not be expending those funds.
Okay, I guess we'll have to have the university speak as to the why. So we didn't study it, but we're going to stand it up anyway, is what it looks like.
Mr. Chairman, this $10 million has stronger language in it, and it directs, the other one was permissive. Arguably, the $500,000 was permissive for the university. This one is a shall, meaning it's more directive that the university proceed with this PA program.
Okay.
The next amendment, House Second Reading Amendment number 20, Representative Washit. He is restoring $140,000 in one FTE to the Supreme Court. You've seen this before. This is the legal position to assist with federal compliance as requested by the judicial branch. JAC denied it. Representative Washit is restoring it in his amendment. The next one, House Second Reading Amendment number 21, Representative Stith's amendment. You will recall that there were 2 FTE related to a data analyst and I believe a IT position of, and both of those positions under JAC's action would have been one time, meaning 1-year position for the Supreme Court. And Representative Stith removes the 1-year limitation and makes those positions ongoing. House Second Reading Amendment number 8, sponsored by Representative Davis. He restored one position in the Wyoming Gaming Commission. You'll recall JAC denied the peace officer position, and Representative Davis was successful in restoring that position. So basically the last 3 you have seen in your JAC markup, and they're essentially reversing the action of JAC. House Third Reading Amendment number 37 is Representative Northrup's amendment. He adds $3.5 million explicitly for community colleges to the Section 300 on enterprise inflation. House Second Reading Amendment number 52 was deleted, and it was deleted by the next amendment, House Third Reading Amendment number 17, so I'll speak to those separately. Representative Northup on second reading added $15 million general fund for unmet housing needs. Representative Lawley came in on third reading and reduced that amount to $10 million. This is for infrastructure for cities, towns, counties, and tribal governments to support affordable housing. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, House Third Reading Amendment number 45, Representative Nicholas offered. It is a budget balancer amendment. This is basically a movement of funds from the LSRA to the budget reserve account. It is not being used in either house on the profile currently. It's a what if provision, and we do this pretty regularly. Senator Perkins ran it last year. We just want to have a difference between the 2 houses so that after you finish all of your bills and have a better idea of what tax reductions are going to pass, what appropriations are going to pass, that you have sufficient money in the right accounts. So right now it does nothing, but it provides a vehicle to balance things out in case you put more in savings from the general fund than the general fund has in it, for example. Mr. Chairman, that completes the
Mr.
summary.
Chairman.
Please.
So Don, if we go back to the back page and we go to the Harshman Amendment for the University of Wyoming for $10 million, is there any language in there that specifies these are just one-time monies, or is this an ongoing expense in addition to the state aid through the block grant? So, and it'd be the same question when we get down to the Lawley Amendment on the unmet housing needs for $10 million.
Mr. Chairman.
Third reading,
Yes,
House
yes.
Amendment 28.
Third reading amendment number 28, frankly, does not specify. We would interpret that as not ongoing, that they would have to come back, but it does not specify. And it's relatively short. I can read the whole thing to you if you want.
No, I just wondered if there was any specific language whatsoever, just something that the conference committee may want to capture.
With respect to Representative Lawley's amendment, on the other hand, I do believe that there is language in that if, yes, it's House Third Reading Amendment number 17. And Mr. Chairman, that is also not specified as one time. Both
Okay,
of those.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that, at one point in time, there was a request from the governor's office to provide some funding through the ARPA Direct Fund for this program. If you could, Mr. Chairman, if staff could look to see if that would still be eligible for ARPA Direct for these unmet housing needs, it might be an area where we could use a little ARPA money instead of general fund money, Mr. Chairman.
I guess I'd ask the same thing about the physician's assistant program.
Mr. Chairman, I think the unmet housing need is fairly easy to respond to because most of this is water and sewer infrastructure, and that the governor's rec had already been vetted by our consultants as qualifying. That I think maybe not every aspect of the needs that the general fund could do, but in broad terms, ARPA dollars could be used, at least according to their consultant. With respect to Chairman Kinski's question on the PA program, I'll have to visit a little bit about that.
Senator Grew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In answer to the good majority leader's question, I think we appropriated 5 out of that housing, out of the ARPA dollars for housing. So there is 10 million available. But my question goes to this strikeout and all the strikeouts on here. When it's struck out like that, that's out of our purview, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's always as it's been interpreted, that is no longer the House position. And the same thing on the Senate side. You have deleted, for example, you have the Senator Boner amendment on the land purchase, and it was struck by Senator Ellis.
So that doesn't become, that's something that's not in any, if a conference committee can't look at that. Okay, I want to make sure. Thank you.
Anything else, Don?
Chairman.
Anything from the committee for Don or Polly? No? All right, I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.